Alright, I got my YouTube chat open. I've got my Watch Me Work chat open. I have silenced the ding.
Nice. Great.
Are you streaming this on Twitch?
I am streaming everywhere.
Okay. And
Also
I
got
have
your share screen up.
I have your share screen up also.
Okay.
And then when you know what? That's a good note. I'm gonna switch this on the screenage so that this is on my OBS screen. Being prepared. Woohoo. That way I can just switch my scene when it's your half of the class. Make this as big as possible. And when other people joins the call, if they joins the call. Boop. Boop.
Should I be sharing your share screen?
When it's your turn to, teachimification? I don't see why you should. And,
Okay.
like, if you're streaming you learning, then I guess yes.
Okay.
I hope it has enough paper. I have the backs of sheets of paper now that I think about it. If I need scrap papers.
Are you ready?
I am. I'm like Hawkeye in the clock, like 1 o'clock on the nose.
Do I get to see your traditional setup?
I am share screening the wrong screen.
Yeah.
Because you're just seeing screenception right now. How about now?
Yes, there we go. Awesome.
What is this black line? What is that? Oh, okay.
All good?
Yes. Except for now I cannot see my chats, which I will stick over in front of my screen on your side. And wait, I was gonna ignore the chats, first of all, anyway, for the first half of the class. So, meh.
Okay.
Meh. Back to you. Back. Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Excellent. Let's go live.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Watch Me Work's Beta Art Fundamentals class. I'm Jasmo.
And I'm Morbid Dinosaur.
Awesome. And we're going to be starting with the drawing side. And Ian, hello.
Hi, Ian. Welcome. So for the first 30 minutes, it's just going to be straight up me blabbing at you guys. And then we'll switch over to the last 30 minutes with you guys' contributions, emailing in what you've done so far, talking about it, and going over points that might not have been clear on.
So follow along.
I also have a syllabus on the DeviantArt stash. If you'd like to link to the syllabus, just let me know and I will drop it in the chat of either Watch Me Work, YouTube, or Jasmine's Twitch. So to get started, you need some materials. You don't need a whole lot of fancy stuff just to get started with drawing, just a bunch of cheap paper. I have some printer paper here. And I would prefer if you had a selection of like colored pencils or a like oil pastel or crayons or something so that you can move from a lighter color to a darker color as the class goes on, and the reason why for that will become apparent later. It would also help if you had a soft-leaded pencil. You do not need any type eraser for this class whatsoever. You can, of course, if you're very attached to your eraser, like I have a Kneadable, I have a white gum eraser, but you don't need one. I'd prefer if you didn't have one. And then you just need to be prepared. That's about it. Prepared to learn. I'm going to be using a Staedtler ink pen just so that what I draw is a little bit more clear for you to be able to see on the other side of the stream. I'm going to be using a lot of references from Secria.net. He also has a YouTube channel where he goes through a lot of the drawing fundamentals that I'm going to be using today. I also have like a selection of books that would be pretty useful. If you wanted to download the syllabus, you could check them out. So first of all, let's go into the tools. The different types of pencils that you can buy are quite varied, quite wide. If you check out the cover of most of these cases, it goes from, like this in particular one, goes from 4B to 6H. And I just want to cover what that actually means. B stands for brittle, H stands for hard. So when you have a brittle lead, that means that you're going to be able to get a very deep, very soft line almost immediately. Upon drawing with it. The harder a lead is, the lighter it's going to be no matter how hard you press on it. That can cause what I call carving into your paper, which means that you're going to have grooves on the surface of your paper that later pencils or ink pens could just slip into, and it's going to kind of mess it up. But if you have a very light hand, that will not happen. And if you prefer to draw with pencil, this can be a helpful way to make sure that your underdrawing is a lot lighter than your ink or your overdrawing. It is a little harder to erase a hard. Brittle, however, makes nice dark marks very easily. It is easier to erase, but it is also a little messier. The brittle lead has a tendency to be able to fly and smear all over the place. You can get it on your hands and kind of smear it around the paper, so that's going to be a comfort thing the longer you get used to your materials. And then a quick note on paper. While I'm using printer paper, there are better papers to sketch on. For instance, I have the Super Deluxe Aquabee, which is a multimedia paper, which means that the surface of it is slightly textured to be able to grip pen, to grip pencil. You can also ink on top of it because it's a heavy weight. The weight of a paper is just the thickness of it. So this is a 93 pound. You can get all the way up to 250 pound, which is like stiff as a board acrylic sheet, and all the way down to something like very light acetate or really thin tracing paper, which I think is something like a 75 pound. Watercolor stuff should be kept somewhere around 110 to 150 pound paper. Inking paper is about the same weight. And then the surface of the paper can either be a hot press or a cold press. Hot press just means it's been seared with heat, so it's a very smooth drawing surface. And then cold press means that you have a slightly textured surface to be able to grip pencil. So cold press is what usually people use to watercolor. Hot press is what people usually use to ink on top of because you have a very smooth surface to work with. Drawing tablets. 60 seconds on that. I get a lot of questions on drawing tablets, and I think you do too, Jazz, right?
Yep.
I use an Intuos 3. I did not start out using an Intuos 3. It uses this little kind of Wacom stylus here. What kind of stylus you use, what kind of tablet you use is irrelevant. It's all about comfort. Start out with a cheaper tablet, like spend no more than $20 to $30 on a tablet, and then when you're like, oh, I definitely need a bigger working surface, or I definitely need a smoother pen, or I definitely need something with a rubber grip, you'll know what direction to go for in looking for your tablet, because I started out with the cheapest thing on the market, which was a $20 Genius tablet, which was, I think, the 6x8, and then I moved up to a 6x8 Wacom in quality, and then I moved into a larger drawing surface in the 11 by, I think mine's like 8x11 now. So that's going to be a comfort thing, and it's going to be as you get used to drawing, you'll find your own needs. So that's all I'm going to say on drawing tablets. So why draw light to dark? So For the purposes of this class, we're not going to be erasing, so you want to be able to have somewhere to go. If you start out with the absolute darkest thing you're able to draw, you have no way of going back and adding anything on top of it and being able to see. So if I draw a square on top of this circle in purple, you can very barely see where my circle was in relation to my square. It's hard to differentiate between these lines. However, if I put this square on top of this blue circle, you can see very clearly where the two were, so I know where I came from and I know where I'm going. And that's going to play into undersketching, and it's going to be a little bit of what we talk about later. So it does have a purpose, and when you're doing something like a figure drawing, or if you're doing a character concept, and you start with a gesture line, and then you're trying to find the pose that you want this gesture to be in, it's very helpful to start in a lighter color. That way you have somewhere to go when you actually figure out where you want your person to be. So even though the strong gesture might be somewhere in this direction, what if your character's shoulders are only this wide? Well, if you started out in the pin doing this, you're going to have a hard time when you get into the final stages of figuring out where all of your anatomy is going to go, because you'll have too many dark lines to fight with. So you want to start lightest to darkest. So we're going to spend a couple minutes talking about pencil grips. And I'm going to use the same old dirty sheet of paper because it doesn't really matter. And I'm going to be using a pen because I feel like this could illustrate the point a little better. So in the last class, which we're just going to reiterate, to show you how differently a tool can be used and to give you a different feel for it. So you've been using pens and pencils your whole life, but if you change the way you use the tool, it can change how you approach drawing in the beginning. So the first thing I want you to do is hold it in the most awkward position possible and then write your name with it. And your handwriting will change because the way you're holding your pen will change. And it's going to feel completely different in your arm. You're going to be using different muscles in your arm and your wrist because you have to interact with your tool a different way. So that's the same thing as drawing with different grips on your pen or on your pencil. So we're going to go over a couple different ways to actually hold your pen or your pencil. The first way is the overhand grips. These are more traditional aspect grips. You can actually mimic most of these with a stylus, which you might be initially awkward, but I've seen people very successfully using like Cintiqs and Intuos products like from Wacom use all of these grips on these styluses. So I will also hold it with the stylus so you can see what I'm talking about. The first is the overhand closer to the tip of the your pen or of your pencil. This is how I would hold it on a Wacom, which is guiding your finger towards the top, almost like you're holding a spray can. But with a actual traditional pen or pencil, you can actually just hold it like this, closer to the tip, and then keeping your wrist and your elbow off the table, just draw a couple of circles. So what that is doing is applying a lot of pressure to the tip. You'll be able to start out getting very dark circles, or very dark lines, we should say. And a word on the actual posture of it, the reason why you're keeping your elbow and your wrist off the paper is so that your elbow is parallel with your pecs and you are drawing from your shoulder. This is a useful tool to keep you from darkening your lines too soon on your paper. And this is a little figure of you being so happy about drawing. Yes, drawing. And these are your chest muscles. And drawing from the shoulder can free up your lines so you can get much broader, smoother curves. It takes the stutter out of your line, which is what going really slowly does. It'll help you make better arcs. It'll help you make better straight lines if you're not having drag on your paper. So if I drew a straight line like this with my elbow and my wrist down, it's going to have a lot of shake to it. But if I just do it really quick like that without having any attachment, you get a much smoother line. So then if I use the same overhand grip but towards the back, I take a lot of pressure off the beginning or off the tip of the pen. And so you're immediately going to get lighter lines just starting off. So if you're having some trouble controlling your pen or controlling your pencil, or if all of your sketches come out way too dark to draw on top of, try holding it closer to the rear of your pen or of your pencil, and that is going to give you a much lighter approach to it. You can also hold it in the center. You can balance it by putting your thumb in the middle and then spreading your fingers out, and then you can approach it just the same, and you do get sort of an in the middle light and dark to it. So this pen's going out. Going to switch to the purple. Hope you guys like purple. The overhand grips can also help you if you sharpen your pencils too much, like I do. So I sharpen the heck out of my pencils. And,
Sorry.
You're fine. My little stubby pencil is fantastic. And I'm going to use him until the day he dies. Until I can not twist it around in my pencil sharpener no more. So when he gets to about here.
Is that a photo blue pencil?
This is a non-photo blue pencil.
There
so
you
that's a dark to light thing. You can also buy non-photo blue lead, which I have inside this mechanical pencil. This is my way of moving from dark to light. Like if I want to sketch or go directly to ink, or maybe if I know I'm going to be working on a pose quite a bit, I'll start in a non-photo blue lead or a non-photo blue pencil. That way, if I put the ink on top of it, it won't scan. That's what non-photo blue means, is like no matter how much you put down, it's not going to show up on a scan, which in a digital world is very useful. So the same thing with the underhanded grip. You can put your fingers closer together and keep it towards the tip and get that same level of control and smoothness. And again, keeping the elbow and the shoulder moving, keep your wrist off the table. It might feel initially awkward, but the closer you get to drawing from the shoulder after you get that core muscle built up, the easier it'll be for you to draw for long periods of time, because you won't have that drag on your elbow or on your wrist. You won't have as many wrist and elbow problems, which is another reason why to sit up completely straight. Now this might seem counterintuitive because your paper isn't completely straight. Most people are going to be drawing on a piece of paper that's flat like this. And if you have your back straight, how the heck are you going to be able to see what you're drawing? And then drawing from the shoulder feels completely awkward. But that is why they have drafting tables. And your paper should be exactly eye level with you, or as close as you can get it. Without that, you're pretty much shooting yourself in the foot. You're going to open yourself up to a lot of distortion in your drawing. This is an exaggeration, of course, because this is more like an easel type situation, but that is really what you should be looking for, is keeping the paper as close to your eye as possible, keeping that distortion out. Or like what happened to me in one of my final projects is I worked on it for about 5 hours while it was flat, and everything was tilted this way. So my chin was up here, my cheekbone was higher than this cheekbone, and it was a complete wreck when I actually held it up eye level. This is a little bit of an exaggeration, but trust me, when you work something for 5 hours, those little things stand out quite a bit in the rendering. So enough on that. Just keep good posture. It'll save you a lot of trouble in the long run. It'll keep you from wrist problems. It'll keep you from back problems. So then you have the writing grips, which is holding it just like you would a writing utensil and then holding it close to the tip, which is going to give you an immediately darker line. So I don't like using this grip unless I'm doing very small dark details like small circles or texture lines or shading or something like that. You can hold it in the center and rest it on the inside meat of your palm, which does lighten your grip just a little bit, but you have to, again, be really conscious of how much pressure you're putting on it in order to get a lighter line. And then holding it back towards the end. I like to keep the inside part, or I'm sorry, the tip towards the palm of my hand when I'm drawing from the end. But that might feel a little awkward, so you can just have it lightly touching, and then again, practice with it. All of these grips you need to practice with, because you're never going to find what's comfortable for you until you do a bunch of little drawings with it. Which one is the best one? There is no right answer. Everything works, but not for everyone. Right? Right, Chris? Right. So then you have the underhanded grips, which I've actually seen a couple of people recently, now that I've been looking for it, which made me really excited because I only use an underhanded grip for painting. So you can use an underhanded grip on a stylus, which you already know you can use all of the grips for a stylus as far as writing. But underhanded grips I use for painting, but you can use for drawing, you can use for styluses, which is just pointing your stylus or pointing your pen away from yourself and allowing it to rest on the first finger of your hand, and then drawing with an upwards motion. So just putting the angle away from yourself to just show you what that looks like with a pencil or with a pen. You would start out like this, which looks to me like a medium grip, even though I'm gripping it really close to the tip. So the farther away from the tip I move it, the lighter and lighter I should get. And then, of course, all the way back at the tip, big, smooth circles. So experiment with these grips, and then find the one that works for you.
Could you maybe switch between different grips depending on what you're doing or what you want to do?
Absolutely. So like I said, I use a underhanded grip for paintbrushes, and what this does for inking is it allows me to get smaller lines to thicker lines, because I'm not actually changing the angle of my hand, I'm just applying more pressure to my thumb. Do I draw like this? No, this feels completely alien to me, but it is absolutely the only way I can get nice, smooth arcs with my paintbrush. Calligraphy nibs, on the other hand, they're built a specific way. You have to hold them a specific way. So you have to hold them at a certain angle, and in order to get control, you cannot hold them all the way back here. Or, I'm sorry, a master might be able to hold them back here. Somebody who's trained in calligraphy for a long while might be able to hold them all the way back here. I cannot. So I hold them really close to the tip in a writing grip, and that's how I do my straight lines or my circles with that. A technical pin has such a fine, precise point that I don't want to bend, and so I hold it very close and upright, which I don't do with anything else, and hold the tip completely flush to the paper. And I don't use this grip for any other utensil other than a micron, because it's built with a square tip, and so I have to keep this square tip completely flat on the piece of paper, or you'll end up bending your micron, which is a no for a $5 marker. What? Okay. So how would I recommend choosing a grip for you? Draw lots of little simple shapes and see which one makes the smoothest or the fastest shape for you. To me, these are fast shapes because I didn't spend a whole lot of time carving out a perfect circle out of them. So that's what I mean by a fast shape. It's how do you get the easiest shape for you? Because you want to be able to draw things like circles and squares really quickly and really easily. So we're going to talk about some misconceptions in drawing. What I mean by misconceptions is that there's a lot of buzzwords out there. The buzzwords that I like to keep in mind is reference. These are the ones we're going to talk about anyway. Erasing, style, and sketching. I feel like all of these things are really L-represented. I have a whole rant on stick figures, but we're not getting into that in this class. So drawing without a reference is a good thing, and it is a bad thing. Can you draw without a reference initially? Sure, all of us did at some point. We all drew human beings looking like this, where we had shirts for torsos, we had stick figures for hands, even Leonardo da Vinci started out drawing something like this because he didn't pop out of the womb with a paintbrush in hand, right? Everybody pretty much, I'm sure we all used circles now that I think about it, for the feet, drew humans like this, and that is a perfectly presentable way of drawing a human. My reasoning in that is because you can identify this as a human. It has 2 arms, it has 2 legs, it gets the point across. So yes, everyone can draw without a reference. When you are trying to get good at drawing without a reference, or what I should say is accurate without drawing or withdrawing without a reference, is you have built up a mental library of shapes. The way you go about building that mental library is by first looking at an object, and so in this I'm going to use a human skull. You look at a human skull and you study it. You study everything about it. You try to make a representation as close as possible to real life with this human skull. And then you get rid of your reference. You hide it completely. Then you draw it again. Your second one is not going to come out as good as your first one, but that's fine, because what your first one gave you was a starting point. You are familiar with the shape of a good-looking skull. You know you can get a good-looking skull to come out of your piece of paper. Does it look exactly like your first one? No. Should it? Absolutely not. Your mind will interpret the shapes differently. So after you draw a skull from reference, and then you draw a skull from your own mind, go back to the original reference, and then say, what questions did I run into here? I got confused with, where do the cheekbones connect to the side of the face and the ear canal? I could not figure out where the eye socket sits in relation to the nose on a realistic skull. How far up between the eye sockets is this nasal cavity? And once you go back looking for those questions that you ran into while drawing without a reference, you remember what questions you asked yourself. And then when you go back to draw again without a reference, you remember the answers. Oh, I remember that I just learned that cheekbones actually swoop around the bottom of the eye socket depending on each and every human being. And so if I wanted somebody with a round cheekbone, I would just draw this shape very small and very curved. And then the nasal socket also varies, but only between this and this point. And so I should place my eye socket somewhere in here depending on how big the nose is, and so on and so on. Erasing destroys your previous reference. If I had destroyed the drawing that I made without a with or without a reference, I would have no reference to draw again. This plays into a method of practicing called iterative practicing. So if you do not have a reference to look at, and I'm not talking about a photo reference, I'm talking about a reference to your own drawing. So if I looked at this skull and drew another skull, I would say, well, this dome of this skull is really round, and I don't know any humans with a skull that round. So in my next drawing, I'm going to try to make it a little less round, a little bit more flat on the top. And then I look back at this drawing and say, well, those eye sockets were really far apart. So then I'm going to draw them a little bit close together, and so on until I have another skull. And then I will look at this skull and base my next drawing on that. And I will have all of the things that I did right and all the things that I did wrong on both of these drawings to base my next drawing off of. So that is a way of getting good really, really quickly, is analyzing your previous drawing and basing your next drawing on it, which you cannot do if you have erased your previous drawing. So that's why I say no erasers. A word on style. And if I'm going too quickly or anything like that, Jasmine is going to stop me.
And I'm keeping an eye on all of the chats, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to type them in. And if I can answer them, I will. And if I cannot, I will definitely ask Morbid for you guys.
And at the end, we'll roll back all the chats and we're going to answer all the questions we possibly can. So just spam them in there, guys. Okay. So another misconception in drawing, I hear a lot of words about style, this big bad word. It was the thing that haunted most drawing students in my art school that I went to. Style is something that all of the professionals tell you to chase last. They say that once you go through drawing for X amount of years and you have X amount of mileage, so somebody said 10,000 drawings later from drawing one, you will have found your style. And this is the point at which you should focus on refining your style. I don't believe that's true, not even a little bit. So this is my own personal opinion. I believe that the time to start focusing on style is in your very first drawing and beyond. And in this time, you will have found your style. Maybe it won't be exactly the style you want, but you'll be closer than if you start all the way down here. So what do I mean by style? I have a reference in there called Understanding Comics by Scott McCloud, and he makes a brilliantly simple point. Style... I'm sorry?
Interjection. Do you want to drop the link to your syllabus and I will drop it in all the chats?
Absolutely. Pulling up the Watch Me Work chat as we speak. Pasta. That is my YouTube.
That is your YouTube.
Hold on, guys. You actually have my email. It's on my DeviantArt stash. That's where I put it. I'm sorry. And I would feel so bad for this if it weren't for the fact that, we can just edit this part out later.
Mm-hmm.
It's totally fine. So if I repeat myself, forgive me, guys. But I thought I had it loaded in my in my pencils like, oh yes, just copy paste, and it totally didn't. Let's see here. Burp, burp. There you go. That's better. All right. So the misconceptions about style. Style, by its very word, actually means to stylize. And to stylize something is to simplify it. When the very first time you start drawing, whether it is drawing a sphere or drawing a cube or drawing a car, you are simplifying. A cube or a sphere is a very complex item. It actually has tons of microplanes and contours and little fissures and stuff like that, and lots of angles that make up this cube. But I simplified it using 3 planes that look like 6 planes, right? And that is just called simplifying. Absolutely everybody does it. This is simplifying. This is stylizing. When you approach a realistic, let's say, eyeball, because this is a very iconic choice, you draw as close to possible with real life, right? And you should get something that looks way better than this because you'll actually spend time on it. And that's we're going to pretend, a really realistic eyeball. When you simplify this eyeball, you are stylizing it. You are iconizing it, which means that you're just coming up with a very fast, simple symbol to represent this eye. And that is your style. The basic shapes that you make real-life items out of is your style. So even if it's something as complex as a kneecap and a calf muscle, even if you could draw all the anatomy stuff in there, whenever you put it to paper, it is automatically going to be simplified. So this is very much a style. And the way that you go about approaching a leg in a realistic manner, even if you get in all the little details and hatchings and like hair and stuff like that, it will be stylized no matter what you do. So embrace it. Simplify it further. When you go in to approach a brand new item that you've never drawn before, so I'm going to use my ink bottle, I break it down into a series of basic shapes. And those basic shapes are how my mind represents the icon of an ink bottle. And if I wanted to stylize this, I would say, how can I make this simpler? And so I would try to break it down into even more basic shapes. So from 3-dimensional cylinders to 2-dimensional cubes and ovals. That is how I would further simplify it. So when you're drawing something super realistically, like arms and legs, do something close to real life and then try to simplify it as far as possible. How many basic shapes can I break this down into? And this plays back into building your own mental library. When you understand that my own symbol for an ink bottle or a leg or a jet engine, it breaks down into these shapes that I made up my very same, like myself. That will be how you can build absolutely any shape under the sun, because you made up these shapes on your own. You stylized them. So I'm taking a little pause here to check how are we doing on time, Jasmine?
We're about 30 minutes into it.
So what do you feel here? You think if I feel like I should cut it short, or do you feel like I should just keep going?
I don't think you should cut it short. I mean, you still have a whole, like, the visualization and drawing through the form.
I do. And why basic shapes?
And oh yeah, and why basic shapes? I would at least do why basic shapes.
Okay. So why start with basic shapes? If you do a turnaround of a human being, you are taking a face that you thought of off the fly, or rather that's how I come up with faces, and then you're asked to turn it away from you in several different dimensions. So to the side, and then you face it around to the rear. And if you do not understand the construction of your own face or of these shapes, this is a job that is nigh impossible. When I first decided that we should start this class, I had everyone start out drawing snowmen, because that is a ball with a cone on it. And if you can draw a ball with a cone on it going off into different sections of space, you have a really good grasp of dimension and of shape. A snowman is a little bit, as it turned out for some people, more challenging than they thought to get these views. Particularly the undershot, which is you sitting below the snowman. But if you can do this snowman, you have a head start on being able to place a nose on a man and have him turn around in space. And keeping the shape consistent, because that's why certain characters that you may or may not have seen if you look at amateur work seem to mutate as they turn in space from this view to this view, because whoever drew them did not understand where those basic shapes sat in space. So when you're starting out with cubes, or if you're starting out with circles or cones, which you should be starting out with all these shapes, if you know how to put these shapes in and out of space, you can draw them at any angle, and then you can construct something on top of those shapes. So I have here a basic cube that I then sat on its side, and then I'm going to draw cylinders on top of. And we're going to pretend like this is a really basic Lego. And because I know how to draw a cube and represent it in space, I should be able to do a side profile of a Lego and turn this Lego away from myself and make it dance a tune with a top hat and all kinds of things, because I studied how to turn a cube and a cylinder in space. And you can break down absolutely anything in this formula, which is to just simply observe it and have it turn in space away from you and observe it again. Without getting into contour lines and stuff like that, you can have this with pens and pencils, with any object that you can observe in real life. You can break it down into a basic shape and study how to turn it around, because that will give you grasp of the form. Animation is essentially taking a basic shape and mutating it in a series of sequential drawings. So if I said this was my drawing number 1, this was my drawing number 6, this was my drawing number 8, and this was my drawing number 10, all I would do is then draw the pictures, let's say, in between these, and that is how I would animate something. And that's also how you draw sequentially. A lot of people want to do comics, but without understanding how to approach doing a sequential drawing like this with basic shapes, you won't get very far. That is how you take a superhero who's flying in a really customary position, like, foot forward, very strong Superman type pose, and you take it from a drawing like this, which is sort of static, and then you turn it into something super dynamic, which would be a fist flying towards you and the body going back into space with his head right here staring at you in determination because he's a superhero. that is how you approach starting to do that. If you understand these basic shapes, you can throw them back into space. You can distort them because you won't be afraid of, will I be able to communicate this as an arm? Will I be able to communicate this as a foot? You will if you keep the shape consistent, and you can keep the shape consistent if you know how to turn around the basic shape. So to visualize, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, and how does one do that?
So visualization and drawing through the form are how you go about building good drawings. And I say building a good drawing because you have to start with construction. So it's just like building absolutely anything. Without good form, you cannot build something good looking on top of it. If I was drawing a picture of a house or of a cube or anything like that, I would start with a good construction and then build something on top of that. So I know where my angles are going. So I know where my building begins and where it ends. To illustrate this even more simply than a house, we're going to talk about just a cube. So if I start drawing a cube like this, it starts getting really distorted very quickly. Does that even look like a cube? No. Are my planes close? Not even. This is a very disjointed looking cube because I started from the outside and worked my way inside. I had no construction. I just went about it. But if I think about, there is a side plane here, which means that there has to be a side plane matching it over here. And then there's a plane in the back that has to be matched by a plane in the front. Now that's a cube. And then because I started light, I can go back on top of this and pick a line out of my sketch to say, yes, this right here is going to be the top part of my cube, which is going to be the top of my house or my construction building or whatever. And it's a little bit more accurate because I drew through the form. So when you draw, let's say, a ribbon, which I think there's some people in the chat that might be familiar with a ribbon. Jazz.
Yep. Damn ribbon.
Tricky ribbons. They're so tricky.
Yep.
You have to imagine where is the other side to this ribbon? If this line here is the center, and this is the back edge, and this is the front edge, and this is the side, this is the plane that is facing this way. No problem, right? Because it's facing you. You have to visualize the other side of that form through your form and place it. Is it going to be accurate your first 150 times of doing this tricky ribbon? Absolutely not. Embrace it. Base your next your next plane and your next ribbon on your previous one and learn from your mistakes. I started it here, but I don't really believe that that is the curve that was supposed to happen. Let's try that again. Let me curve it forwards like this. Does that look a little bit more accurate? Actually, it does. But because I drew lightly, I will ignore this line in the back. But because I drew this line in the back, I know where to place the line in the front. And that is the key to drawing through the form. So this tricky ribbon exercise, by just taking a flat plane and warping it, you can also do this with a piece of paper. Just a one-dimensional piece of paper, and you can practice folding it into different directions and imagining that there's another side to this piece of paper and then bisecting it and with a line. You are teaching yourself to visualize through the form what is the other side of the object I can't see. What is it doing? And this comes into play with absolutely everything. If you're drawing a grain silo, you have to imagine a cylinder going back in space. Because if you don't, how will you know how far back to set maybe a tree that is supposed to be on the same plane as the backside of this grain silo? You will know because you drew it through the form. And then you can place things in front of it, like a slightly bigger tree, or a dog, or whatever. It's a beautiful dog, just for you guys. visualizing through the form will help you when you are turning things in space, when you are approaching drawing like anything as technical as a mech or a engineering part, or drawing something as simple as a human, if you could call that simple. um, it's a whole different beast because we see humans every day. But let's just say something simple like a pen. If you had to draw this pen rolling away from somebody in space, and you had never studied how to approach drawing a cylinder in the first place, how would you know how to distort your cylinder so that it looks like it's going away from you? You have to study it. How do you get your cylinder round? You draw through the form. So eyeballing your angles is a method of measuring your drawing against itself. It's how I draw anything that has planes, or straight planes, I should say. So if you draw two lines, and you say, yeah, I would say that if this one continued going off in space and this one continued going off in space, they would never intersect. And that's a parallel line. When you're drawing anything that's like flat or cube-like, you want to keep parallel lines you want to keep them in mind. When you're drawing something like a three-dimensional object made up of flat planes, those parallel lines are going to be really, really important. We also did this exercise in the last class. And it's a little trickier than it looks, which is pretty much drawing this disjointed pizza box, and then drawing it in different angles and drawing a line down the center of it. It can get kind of hellish if you are not familiar with measuring your angles against itself. So this looks a little disjointed. What do I mean by measuring my angles? Well, this is parallel and this is parallel. So this line here should be the same as this line here. I measure it out about this. It should be about this on both sides of my drawing. This line here should be about this line here and this line here. So you can go about correcting all the angles in your drawing if you establish a good angle to begin with. It's the same thing as drawing a room and measuring out the angles at which the ceiling and floor go to, and then measuring where the dresser is sitting in relation to that, or where the top of the dresser is with a vase sitting on it, or flowers, or something like that. Those angles become very important, and if you never measured out your angles, which you don't have to pull out a protractor for something like a folded pizza box, with the interior design, I've been taught that it's very different. You do need a protractor. You must get these just so. But if you're stylizing it, you can kind of freehand it a little bit. And you measure these angles against your ceiling and against your floor, depending on where your eye is. And because you drew lighter, you can get closer and closer and closer by eyeballing and measuring up against your own drawing. And that's how you set things into the same space, or you make things appear as if they are the same or in the same plane. So with everything we talked about today, you should of course never be erasing, because that is how you approach iterative drawing. Iterative drawing is literally the fastest way I have ever seen of getting good at drawing very quickly, because you are literally taking your object or your pencil or your car, and you are not drawing the same one over and over and over again, which is something I've heard before. You need to draw 10,000 of these and one of them will come out good. That is absolutely incorrect. If you draw the same thing over and over again, you're just going to get good at drawing something wrong. If you base your next drawing on your previous drawing, whether it is a house, a car, a human being, whatever, by studying what went wrong in your first drawing, you will be able to correct your second drawing. don't do this 150 times because it's just going to ingrain whatever is going wrong on your page. So do this about 20, and I'm not saying do it with 20 heads. I'm saying do this with 20 everything, not 100, because you will get tired of it. And also, if you take a break from your drawing and you come back, you will have fresh eyes on what went wrong in all of these drawings. And then the next time you want to draw 20 somethings, you will have an entire sheet of reference of what went right and what went wrong. And you can say, okay, in number 15, I like the mouth here. I feel like I did that well. In number 12, I feel like I did the jaw right. And in number 3, the eyes were the best out of everything. And then you can make one compilation drawing where you try to nail what you did right in all of those other drawings, which you cannot do if you erase or if you throw things away. So keep all your sketches and stop erasing your own work. And that's all I have for the drawing portion.
Awesome. Do you want to take a small intermission?
Absolutely.
Awesome. Give us a few minutes, and we'll be right back. Morbid, are you there?
Yes, I am. So now we're
Alright.
going into like the open forum part of class, so we can be a little less.
I was gonna say we still have like 10 minutes, and then our first hour will be up. Do you want to like keep that 10 minutes open for questions and
Yeah.
stuff?
Absolutely.
All right.
So I'm pulling up my chats and going back to my traditional setup. Boop, boop, boop. Watch me work. And YouTube. I'm sorry, my OBS is going to get lowered. Whoop. You want more tricky ribbons? We can absolutely do some more tricky ribbons. Excuse me. So what do you find is the hardest part of approaching the tricky ribbon, Taco Cat? And I'll turn on my ding so I'm alerted. Also, my YouTube chat is hanging out here somewhere. YouTube, where has you gone? There it is. Thank you so much, Easy Drawing.
Oh, he was joking.
Oh, okay.
Taco was joking.
Oh, you were
But
joking.
okay. Yeah, I was actually gonna ask like how you make like a skeleton of a body. What symbols and icons do you use?
Me personally,
Mhm.
first of all, I start out with a corn for absolutely everything. I call this a corn shape. And I use different versions of this corn shape for just about everything. And that's part of my rant on stick figures. Cyanide and Happiness is a great comic that puts this out. XKCD is a great comic that puts this out, where they just get all of their points across using stick figures because stick figures are awesome. And this relates to the corn because this corn shape is my version of a stick figure arm. It is how I use to represent absolutely everything. So when I go about drawing, let's say I'm going to use a calf because this is what I'm actually working on right now in my free time. I imagine a corn shape here, and I imagine a corn shape there, and then I start basing other lines on that drawing. So this is a part of a class that we'll go into later, which is how to find your shape, which you can use to represent everything. So when I start with a stick figure, I of course start with a gesture drawing, which let's say that this is a lady standing all pretty. I would want her to have like this sort of like gentle arcing line. And then I would put in a line for the shoulders and a line for the hips. And then I use the lightning bolt technique, which is a way of portioning out your basic proportions. So if I want my arm to be, let's say, holding a purse, I would say my deltoid goes to about halfway to the arm there, and then it cuts up to the pectoral, and then it goes down to the elbow, and then it cuts up to the wrist, and then I have a corn shape for the hand. Then I draw a circle or an oval egg corn shape for the torso, and I put a V in there to point the direction of the torso. I draw another line for the neck, another like ovoid corn shape for the head, and then I put a line in to show what direction my face is going. Then I take this curve as a parallel line to my gesture line for the spine. And then for a female, I actually use this corn shape to represent the hips. I actually use a different corn shape to represent male hips, which is a pointy corn, because male hips point towards the front. And then I use another lightning bolt to do the front of the leg, to go back to show where the thickness of my leg is going to be, and then a curve of the calf, and then a slant for my ankles. And with a woman, I would point the toe because, you know, ladies wear heels. Why not? And that's how I would go about drawing the stick figure version of my lady. And then you go back in and you start adding in form shapes, which you have to find your own symbols for. So I use a corn shape for the front of the head to give it kind of roundness. I just kind of fill out the web between the hip and the bottom of the rib cage. I put in another parallel arc for the back of the leg. I round out the buttocks because, that's fancy. Uh, I add a cone shape for the point of my kneecap. And then I do a parallel line with the back of this calf because that looks better, not because it's accurate, for the front of the shin. And that's how I would basically parcel out a lady shape. Getting into the specifics of how you would draw each individual arm or each individual limb in detail is literally dissecting each individual body part. So I think I showed you how I drew a foot was I start out with actually a footprint. And I imagine a footprint kind of looks something like this, right? That's a footprint, right? And then I go about building shape on top of this footprint. So this is a kind of a challenging angle to visualize, so I'll actually change it. I do a heel, and yeah, we'll visualize it like that. Then I do a cone on top of this, and I do a pyramid type brick. I suppose if this was in a different three-dimensional view, it would look something like that. Like a wedge. That's a wedge shape attached to a cylinder. A cone cylinder with a chopped off top. And then you have like a side plane, which is actually sloped. So instead of drawing that in, I actually just lead into it with a line on either side and kind of shade in the side of the arc of the foot there. So you get a sense of depth. And then approaching the toes can be kind of difficult because toes are actually steps. So you have like a step for the bone, you have a step for the toenail. So you would kind of step down your toes, because you have more than one, right? Hopefully. And then when you're placing ankles, from the front view, the inside of your ankle should be slightly higher and in the middle than the outside, which is towards the back and lower to your cone. So if this was the inside, which it is because this is the big toe, right? You would place this a little bit higher and in the center and lead back or lead up with a bone, and then you'd have an arc or a hollow back here where your Achilles heel is, which you wouldn't draw all these lines, but it's good for visualization. And then you just go about correcting your drawing. Like, do I want it to be facing more in that direction, and so on and so forth.
Sideshow has a question.
Yeah.
How do I get better at reproducing stuff I've already drawn? I can't seem to ever draw the same thing twice. Is it just repetition, or is there another way?
There is another way. I was actually doing this morning because I drew a character concept that I really liked, and then I drew 3 more and I hated them, and I was like, what did I do in that original character concept that I liked so much that I could not do in these other drawings? And so here's what I do. I would, let's say that we were in a traditional medium, because that's what I have in front of me. I would take my original, which I think I have some sketches here. Yeah, we can use these. So out of all of these, I liked this one the best. This isn't the character design I went with, but this is the one we're going to choose. And as you can see, all of these are so far away from that original. But this is the one I liked. So the first thing I would do is I would take a piece of tracing paper and I would put it on top of this person, and I would not trace this figure exactly. I would throw down some measurement lines. So top of the eyes, bottom of the chin, and start putting down landmarks that I found in my original drawing. So essentially you are tracing it without any of the details. So top of the eyebrows, bottom of the eyebrows, inside of the eye, outside of the nose. Make tons and tons of little measurements and keep it very generalized. Don't put in any specifics, just your basic shapes, right? Then once you have this measurement drawing, put away your original that you really liked, and then base your next drawing off of your tracing, which I call my ruler. So I have a like slightly arched chin or cheekbones or whatever it is. I have something like this. And that's what I'm basing this drawing off of, my measurements. I'll throw down these lines and say, oh, look at how much space is between the top of the eye and the eyebrow. I want to mimic that much space. How much space is between the top of the eyes here? About this much space. The nose is about this much width. I'm eyeballing it, or maybe I'm measuring with my pencil. This much space here. And then you can go about, based on your own measurements, reproducing that drawing. It might take you a couple of tries, but it's much faster to analyze the drawing in a sort of technical sense than to eyeball it and keep trying to reproduce the same thing over and over again. Does that make sense?
So make your own ruler based
Exactly.
off of the thing you're trying to reproduce.
Absolutely. And then throw it underneath it and see how far away you were from your original ruler. Maybe the ruler was off, or maybe what you drew was too far away from the eyeball. Another thing you can do is there's a lot of stigmata on tracing, but it's always good to, or stigma, I guess. Stigmata is something different, right?
Stigma.
There's a lot of stigma on tracing, but take your previous drawing and trace on top of it to get a feel for the form. So it's like, I could not for the life of me replicate this curve. This is the curve that's messing me up. Take a new piece of paper and go over it a hell of a lot of times. Like, this is my curve. And then, like, right next to it, draw another curve and another curve. Like, to get closer to that original curve, you have to, like, start dissecting it in pieces.
Awesome.
Does that make any more sense?
The Streamlike and Sideshow says yes.
Okay, coolio.
Sweet.
Any other questions, comments, concerns? Anybody want to send in something they're sketching or anything like that? Mom actually gave me some sketches because she's been following along with this class. She's gone now, so she will not benefit from any feedback. But so
you can always save that for the beginning of next class.
Right. Just saying, like, if you want to send in your sketches, feel free.
And where do we send in our sketches?
Oh, I'm sorry. You can email them. Thank you, Easy Drawing. You can email them to me with the super professional. Oh no, my pen. Okay, here we go. To newton.braun@gmail or to bronwyn@watchmework.com. Whoops, there's a C in there. Thank you so much, Jasmo.
Yep.
So any other questions or anything like that? Or we're going to turn over the class to Jasmo. If you're sending stuff in, you can just be like, hey, I'm sending stuff in, give me a second.
Getting no response from chats, so I think we can move on.
Okie dokie. So on my stream, I'm going to pop it over to my digital layout over here because we are going to be following along with Jasmo Colors and her digital painting tutorial. Take it away, Jazz.
It's not so much a digital painting tutorial as it is learning how to see. We're learning how to observe. If you go to college and get, your first drawing class, you'll notice that they made you draw a lot of still life things. And that's to teach you how to observe and break things down into pieces and parts so that you can draw them, right? And normally you'd have like a little bamboo stick, or you would use your pencil to measure out things and get their form down on the paper so it looks accurate. And then eventually you'll get from drawing to shading. And shading is quite the beast. And it's not too bad, actually. You don't need to be scared of it. You just need to know pieces and parts of light and shadow. And that's why I have these spheres up right here. You'll if you have a keen eye, or even if you don't, you might notice that there's a little light spot down here on this sky. Like, regardless of the texture, regardless of anything else, this is the first thing that I want you to see. And because it is probably the last thing you will think about, and that's the reflected light. On last class, everyone always forgot to put the reflected light on their little snowman, and that's probably because I didn't have an actual picture to break down light and shadow. Let me take a deep breath here so I can keep talking. So shadows are actually broken down into like 5 different parts: highlight, light, shadow, core shadow, and reflected light. Yeah, actually, put this up here. There you go.
I was gonna ask, like, can you write that down for us?
Yes, yes, I can. Make it big. There. Okay. Highlight. Oh, it shrunk again. Highlight. Doop, 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 doop. Light. Shadow. Core shadow. Reflected light. And then there's always the cast shadow. Make this big. Stretch this out. Make this real big so everyone can see. And every object, most of the time, is going to have these 6 actual things in common, or on their shape. Namidaka, hello, and Wordwin, hello. Yes, indeed. So let me draw some things so we can kind of dissect them. You'll notice that these spheres are actually all different materials, and this image is from Sandstock on DeviantArt. It is a stock image, that's why I'm using it. Can we see some red? We can see some red. So our highlight is about here, right? It's the brightest spot on this sphere. It's about here, and then it fades out into a light area, and you might even stretch that out into like a light area on here. And then you have your shadow. This is your shadow. And then you have a core shadow that may not run all the way through a sphere, depending on how it is lit up. So this is your highlight, your light, shadow, core shadow, and this little bugger right here is your reflected light. And of course, this is your cast shadow. And your reflected light it's coming from the surface. The surface that the sphere is sitting on is what's creating this this reflected light. There you go. And all of these have reflected light on them in some way. And reflected light, you can barely see it on this ball of yarn because it's so soft. Let me zoom in. But it is there, like right in here. There is some reflected light, and even like a little bit back here, there is some reflected light. And it's learning to see these things without having to, draw lines that will help you shade. But like, if you are drawing and learning how to shade at first, I would totally break my shapes down into something like this. I would have a sphere and be like, all right, I want my highlight here. I have a really high shiny spot, and then all of this is going to be light. And then there's going to be a little tiny strip of shadow, and then there's going to be a core shadow right here, and all of this is going to be reflected light. Core, shadow, light, highlight. And that's how I would draw spheres in practice with my spheres a ton. And on some materials, it's way more the thermal exhaust port, yes. On some materials, it's way more obvious as to where that highlight is. On these, totally. You can see there's a nice shiny spot right here. And then you have your light. And then you have your shadow. I can draw accurately. And then you have this really dark band right here, your core shadow. And then what's left, usually, is your reflected light. And I repeat this over and over and over again until it's ingrained. Because like I said on our previous class, everyone kept forgetting the reflected light. And to me, it's natural.
What is an occlusion line?
What is an inclusion line? Who said?
Ian did.
Occlusion line. There you go.
Sorry, I did not mean to interject. I just like, is this part of the shadow portion?
You're totally fine. Let's find out. Because I've never actually even seen that word. Ian, teach me. quite literally teach me. I might subconsciously know what it is because I've been shading for so many years. I just don't know the term anymore.
I think maybe occlusion shadow? Occlusion light? I don't know. I'm just sitting here drawing circles.
Is it part of the cast shadow? Because the cast shadow is an entirely it's not entirely different, but it is another beast, and it has its own general rules.
It very well might be. He hasn't said anything yet, so...
Okay, stream delay. I'll put that up for stream delay, but I can move on to cast shadows.
Please, just give it a little pause and then continue.
Okay. The hard black line that will appear between two objects. That is very, very true. Let me see here. So I think what Ian's talking about is if you have a surface or a ball on a surface and you're drawing it from, a side profile and your light is casting, this way, where your ball meets your plane, that's going to be the darkest line, is right here on this particular spot. But over here where it curves away from the ground, that's where your reflected light will be. Oh, thank you, Namitaka. And Wordwin also, everyone knows what it is but me. Like, I don't know the term, but I do practice it and put it in my pieces. There you go. And that is called the occlusion line. I'll put that on terminology. Thank you, Ian, Namitaka, and Wordwin. Occlusion. Okay. Stretch this out here. There we go. And I thought I had all my terminology. Oh, where can we put this? Where can we put this? We'll put this somewhere down in...
Well, I mean, you knew what it was. You just didn't label it. Like, I don't label contour drawing. Like, now I'm going to move on to doing some contours. I don't say that in my mind before I do it. I just flip and do it. You know what I mean? Like...
True. At some point, things become so natural you forget, like, the actual term of what that particular thing you did is.
Right, like when we were talking, when you were giving me a color class, I will never not bring this up because it was just freaking hilarious. So I'm sorry, Jasmine, but I'm going to tell everybody. Like, when I was being taught by Jasmine how to color, she was like, all right, now let's just put on some of this color. And I was like, how do I make this color? And she was like, oh, you don't know how to make colors. Well, let's just roll this back for a second and do a color wheel. And then, because you should definitely know how to make colors before you start painting. And so instead I got a lesson on how to make a color wheel. So it's just like, yeah, it is stuff that is so well ingrained in our own psyche from just doing it over and over again. It never occurs to us to explain it. That's why we need you guys in the chat to give us feedback, because there might be something that, either of us are doing that we just totally don't even realize it anymore.
Indeed, and that's why these are beta classes. I keep trying to save this damn thing. Anyways, moving on to cast shadows. There's a whole bunch of general rules that cast shadows tend to follow, and cast shadow is this big, black, round shadow that's behind all of these. I can, draw on, not the image itself. Oh, there we go. Because I already did in Fubard with that guy. That's okay. Cast shadows. It is a lot easier to see these things from life. I 100% recommend always drawing from life, as in you line up these spheres in front of you on your desk and turn a lamp on and draw what you see in front of you, rather than finding a picture like this and drawing from a picture, because a picture actually flattens out the image for you already, and it does kind of simplify things and make it easier to see things. Drawing from life will give you a lot better observation skills in the long run. Not that, drawing from pictures is bad. You can certainly do that and practice with it. You'll just get a little bit more benefit and get a little bit better feel for it if you draw from life. And Studio HQ asks a value bar. We will get to that. We will definitely get to that somewhere in here. I have a whole list of notes off to the side, of which I also...
Oh, she's in your watch me work. I was like, I thought I had all the chats up.
Yep. I don't think I actually listed a value bar in here.
Value?
Yet.
Yeah, I thought that was something we would cover, like...
We did not actually cover values, like specifically like how to make a value bar at all. So let me tag that in here. A value bar. There we go. See? Beta. All right. Back to cast shadows. General rules. And I'm actually just going to verbally list these off. Or, better yet, stick that right over here. Make this huge, big. We were looking at all the green things. All the green things. Cast shadows are generally darker than the surface they fall upon. Well, that's what a shadow is, right? But shadows in the artistic world can be interpreted in many different ways. So you have blue shadows, red shadows, colored shadows, not colored shadows. And depending on everything that you want your image to be, will help determine what your shadows will be like. Because water, shadows in water are very different than shadows in light. Cast shadows are dark and hard-edged when the light source is close to an object, and will become lighter and softer edged when the light source is farther away. So what that means is, notice our shadows here have a very hard line. I'm like it light, dark, very, very obvious. What they're saying is that if the light source gets farther away from these objects, the softer and less sharp it will become. That's also, I think, true if you pick your object up off of the surface of what it is resting on. And yeah, my brain just broke. Oh my god.
It's okay. In the future, could you maybe like put little thumbnail examples of each one of these rules in application?
Yes. Let me make a note of that.
It's totally fine. I need to like hear something like 38 fucking times before I remember it. So this will absolutely be fresh information the next time you go over it too. Like
true. Very, very true. Yeah, because I haven't read these rules in like a freaking long time, like years. But the things, I always follow the rules.
They're muscle memory now. You don't have to think about the rules. You just follow them.
Yeah, exactly. So cast shadows begin underneath an object, not beside it. So what that means, object, ground, your shadow starts here. Shadow starts here and not over here. It starts from underneath your object and not from the side of your object. And yes, it would be nice to have some thumbnails. I agree. Cast shadows follow the forms and the planes they fall on. That's a good one. So it not only casts a shadow of the shape of the thing that is casting the shadow. If this surface was uneven and bumpy, this shadow would still be round, but it would follow the shape of the uneven and bumpy surface. And cast shadows run the opposite direction of the light source.
Now, that might seem like a silly thing to say, but you would be surprised how often we, in our critiques, see people not doing this. Like,
true, there will somehow get like a second or third light source that's just magically in the middle of a piece, lighting up some like a part of a figure, and it's like, where is that light source coming from? That really shouldn't be there. Or you need to put a light source in so it can be there.
right, so you'll see like a super strong shadow, but absolutely no clear light source. But somebody with like, like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, bright sunny day shadow, no light source.
Yep. This is what I was trying to say earlier with the hard edge, soft edge when the light source is farther away. The closer an object is to the ground plane, the darker and sharper the cast shadow is. Also, the larger the shadow is. Yeah. So if your ball is right on the paper, the shadow is going to be fairly large. If you pick your ball up, the shadow is going to get smaller and smaller. And the farther away an object is from the ground plane, the lighter and softer the cast shadow is. So not only does your cast shadow get smaller if you pick your ball up from the paper, it will get lighter in value. And multiple light sources will produce multiple cast shadows that are darkest in value when they overlap. So if any of these overlapped, it would be like super dark. So if this ball cast a shadow over here, this would be the darkest part of the shadow. And there's actually like, I don't think it's mentioned in here. It's not. There are actually pieces and parts of a cast shadow, just like there are pieces and parts of lighting on a sphere. Shadow, your very poorly drawn shadow, your light source, your light, your shadow, your core, your reflected light. There's a little bit of reflected light in your shadow that bounces off of your object. So there will be like, it'll be a little bit lighter right next to your object. And get dark, it'll have its own core shadow, and then it'll be mostly dark around the edges, depending on how strong your light is, how far away it is, and all the other things that we just learned. That was really bad. That was really, really bad. There we go. So you'd have a little bit of reflected light, a big old core.
Could you do the shadow parts in black and do the ball in red?
I could. That I could. Let me get on. Let me just make a new layer, nice clean canvas. You can do it. Oh God, you can do it. There we go. We'll draw a nice big red ball. A cast shadow. You'll have kind of your reflected light here, and actually your core shadow is going to be right in the middle. Now this is much more subtle than it actually is on a sphere. Sometimes it will be more apparent. It just depends on like your lighting, the ambient light, all that good stuff. So there's a highlight, light, shadow, your core shadow, and all of this is reflected. Core, this is shadow, this is light. Your highlight, it's pretty much the same thing. This is your reflected light. This is basically your shadow, and this is basically your core shadow. But all of these parts depend on where your object is. If your object is sitting above the ground, you're just going to have kind of a light shadow that has a core shadow in the middle. Hopefully I'm explaining things okay, because I don't know. If anyone has any questions, let me know.
If I have questions, I will totally do this. I just would like to point out how interesting it is that when I draw like the contours on a sphere, and like let's say I was laying out shadow, I would immediately make the core shadow the exact same shape as the other one, so like in a nice smooth arc, and you intuitively make it a kind of triangular shape. Could you explain how you arrived at that observation of how you make the core shadow on a sphere into more of a tapering sort of line rather than a straight arc?
Oh, this guy?
Yes, ma'am.
This thing right here? It all depends on your light source and your objects and the material of your objects. Because notice on this clay, I don't know what this is made out of, that the core shadow, let me move this, or just let me make another layer. Yeah, the core shadow on this guy is just a triangle. It's just this, it's this slice right here. But on this shinier guy down here, it actually kind of wraps all the way around. So depending on where your light source is, depending on what your material is, helps determine what shape your core shadow is. Because on this thing, it's an entirely different shape, even though these look like they're the same material, or at least close to being the same material. That's where drawing from life helps you a lot. If you draw from life enough, you build up your own mental library, and you can say, okay, a slightly shinier object is going to have this shape of a shadow or this type of a shadow if the light is this bright. And for things that are more matte shaded, this is not shiny at all. It's, the core shadow is going to be a little bit tinier depending on where the light is. Chrome versus like a clay ball is super different, super different. And I suggest starting not with shiny objects because it's a lot easier to shade gently, at least for me, than it is something really shiny with hard cast light and hard cast shadows. Do I have an example of it? I don't, but I do have an example of this. We have a different light source, and I think these are actually the same materials as before. Yeah, that's the same two balls, but there are things to observe. Now we know our light source is coming from the side. Move this up here. Up. There we go. Oh god. Our light source is coming from the side. We can tell because there's a shiny white spot. So our light is literally just that one way. And if you take a really good close look at the ball, there's actually quite a lot of reflected light over here. And the shape of it is kind of like this. This whole area is like reflected light. And there's a hard core shadow right here. And then just your plane shadow kind of comes down right here. And even though there's a little bit of light bouncing off, because it's textured, your shadow is still generally in this area. Here's a little pocket of light. And there's another core shadow right down here with just the tiniest little triangle of more reflected light. So there's actually, it seems like there's a soft light source coming from this way since the surface cannot reflect light up here. So we actually kind of see there are two light sources, one really, really strong and one that's not really strong. But we still have big old strong light, and this is all light. But you'll notice this is a cast shadow from the sphere. This sphere is casting this shadow. And we can tell because of this round part right here, where else would that shadow have come from? We got a little tiny core shadow here, and this sphere is actually reflecting light off of it onto the smaller sphere. So there's a little section of reflected light right here. And right here is that reflected light from the other side, right here. We have our shadow, which actually is this entire area. And you could even break some more shapes down in there. Now, it's not only just like 5 layers of light and shadow. There could be 6, 7, just depending on what your material is made out of. Because to me, there's a shadow area here, a little bit of light up here. And this whole thing is light right here. So if you took the image away, let me redo this. Ugh. That's what the sphere would look like in terms of shadows to me. Oh god, don't do that. Yeah. Oh, Jesus. Technical difficulties. It's a map. It's quite literally a map that you just made for all of your lights and all of your shadows. Now, you do not have to draw like this, though. It looks very bizarre without the object underneath of it or without any shape or lighting or anything beneath it. But you could always, draw your own sphere and dissect it into the pieces and parts that you would like it to be. And I think I can actually move on to value at this point.
Sure.
I will still cover like transparent objects.
Can we take a 5-minute break?
Yes, we can take a 5-minute break. Intermission. We will be back. Yeah, we'll be back in a few minutes. Bronwyn, are you back?
I am, and I have a request before we continue into value. Well, it starts with a question.
Mhm.
So, by going to value, do you mean that you're going to cover the topic of how values are represented in the color spectrum, like reds are always dark and that sort of thing?
No.
Okay.
Gray, black, white, gray only.
Okay. Awesome.
Because color is a whole different thing.
Totally. And then after you talk about value, would you be willing to show some direct examples of how to approach dissecting the different shadows out of real life objects, like something like cubes and cones?
Mm-hmm. I can do that. You'll have to remind me, though.
I'm sorry, my sister's got her stand mixer going, so I was trying to like take a second, like shut it off. Forgive me. All right, and I'm turning back on my digital art screen, and there we go. Ready.
All right. We are back, and you might notice that I've changed my screen up just a little bit. I have a gray background, and I made a little box line thing up here that we're going to put our values in. Values are our lights and our darks. It's the range of values that we're going to use. We can go from black to white, or not quite black to not quite white, because we're going to be shading a sphere. But the first thing you do want to do is make your values. There you go. So you have your sphere, but we want to know the range in which we're going to shade it. Is it going to be a shiny sphere? Is it going to be a matte sphere? And I'm going to go from dark to light, and I have a hard black and a hard white, and I'm only going to use black and white digitally, because traditional people, you can use different hardnesses of pencils or different colors of any medium, but usually you start out with like just charcoal or those pastels, black and white pastels. And I'm using a gray sheet of paper so that the gray sheet of paper can act as my mid-tone value. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I have 6 little squares. I probably should have 7. Should probably have 7. So I'm going to go boop. So I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So I'm going to have a mid-tone. This is my mid-tone. I'm not going to put anything here. And I'm going to actually color across all of these until I get a range that I like. Same with this. We're going to go fairly across the board, and then I'm going to come back over here until I get it as light as I would like it to be.
And this technique is called building up value, right?
Yes. We are building up our value. Now this might be a little too harsh, depending on what your material is that you want your sphere to be made out of. Or it could be not harsh enough. You could want chrome. I'm not going to do chrome. Chrome is difficult for me. I do not have a live representation of a chrome object in front of me. So I'm going to do something that I'm very familiar with, and that is soft shading. And in art school, they want you to work from light to dark, even with your values, not just your construction drawing. They want you to go from light to dark. My brain kind of works a little bit backwards. And I go from dark to light, or I don't actually go from dark to light. I'm going to put in my core shadow right here, because my light source is going to be right here. And I didn't actually use the strongest values of either one of these yet. I like to work back and forth. It's my personal preference. This is, another thing you need to get a feel for is how you want your work process or your work flow to go. So I just laid in very general shapes. And so if my light source is here, I'm going to have light all around here, and I'm going to be really super light about it. You can still do this with your medium, traditional medium that you're using. Depending. If you're using watercolor, you would use a really thin, watered down paint so there's not a lot of color on it, even if you're using black ink or watercolor to start with.
Could you explain really quickly why it is better to build up value than to subtract value when you're starting out?
Yes. So when it's hard to take things away in a traditional sense. So if you end up starting with, I'm going to put all of my shadows in on my sphere, and you have this much black and you have this much white, it's really hard to take away from that. Really hard. Like, it's near impossible, especially if you're painting. If you paint and you're like, well, this is going to be all of my shadow and this is going to be all of my light, it's going to be kind of hard to put in your midtone without having the ability to erase. Or you need to mix paint and paint over it again, and that could ruin your paper. If you're on paper, it could ruin your canvas. It could create too much texture or buildup on the surface that you are working on. If you work lightly and in general shapes first, it allows you to make corrections over time. That's why I put in not the darkest black that I could possibly put on my core shadow, because I may find that I actually kind of want my core shadow to extend down a little bit. But building up gives you chances to correct mistakes or to adjust your drawing if you're not kind of liking the direction that it's going in. And when you're shading, you do work from a very general shape to a more specific shape. And in terms of digital, you work with a large brush and start using smaller and smaller brushes for the little tiny details. And usually I never start with my darkest dark values. I start with, like I said here, the not quite. I usually start around in this range right here. And I shade black. Black and white is very, very stark. And if you are digital, you have a chance to come in and actually change that. And my midtone kind of got swallowed up throughout here.
Question.
Mm-hmm.
So is this the time where you would use squinting or thumbnailing?
Yes, you definitely could. If you are planning out your drawing, I'm not too familiar with the squinting method, but I am with the thumbnail method, where if you're trying to figure out a light source on your object, on your shape, you do little boxes with little shapes. Maybe you want your light source here, reflected here, shadow here, other shadow underneath or over here. You do thumbnails to help you plan. Usually they're a little bit bigger so you can see a little bit more. So what if I wanted my light like down here? A little bit of reflected light up here. My core shadow is here. This will help you plan.
So it's like a thumbnail of your own value bar, but actually on the object that you plan on shading.
Yes. Well said. This sphere is awful. Ugh.
You said it first.
That's very true. Value bars, there's a whole bunch of planning that goes into shading and drawing, and you can use these to help you on your big final piece. Like so. Draw over my drawing. Can't forget
I'm
the
the queen of drawing over my drawing. Like.
Yeah. Don't forget your cast shadow. And of course, this line where the sphere meets the floor, the occlusion line. I do now vaguely remember that being said in my art classes so long ago, that this is the darkest part. There's still, notice, there is a reflected light right here. And to me, like, it just looks correct. Even though my sphere is misshapen and it's not shaded very well, it still reads light-wise pretty decent. It's not awesome. But if you come back here,
Now that's a thumbnail, ladies and gentlemen.
it's still pretty awful though.
But it is adhering to the rules, like Bob Ross's rule of every highlight needs a friend, and that friend is a shadow, you know?
Very, very true. And that is the other thing. When you are lighting, rarely. Is this all on one thing? It is. Ah, nice. Let me draw another example here. So let me. Oh, that's an oval. Oh, that would have worked. I'll do an oval because I can. So we had our value bar. Let's kind of get it back a little. Wrong side. Rarely is there this huge gap in between the values. They usually come right up next to each other. Right up next to each other. So unless it's chrome, you will rarely have a sphere that looks like this.
Looks pretty chrome to me.
Yeah. I'm like, leaving a big old plane of your base color or your mid-tone color really flattens things out. Like super flat. It's missing a lot. And if it was chrome, it would have a whole bunch of other shiny and dark things going on everywhere else, so that would read more as chrome. But if you are having issues with your pieces looking flat, it's because you probably left some space. This space in between your light and your shadow. They should really, for the most part, always touch. Even if it's super subtle. Even if it is super subtle. And that will help your shapes not look flat.
On the subject of not looking flat, like I noticed that you're curving your approach there, like you're just kind of moving your brush in an arched way.
And this is true. Bronwyn's trying to hint at me. She is trying to hint at me contour. So that's another thing that I just do naturally because I've done it so much. You have an object. You have several objects. Let me make a bean here. When you shade, or even when you draw or like hatch marks, you tend to follow the contour of the shape. Notice I always put in my core shadow in a rounded curved shape that follows the shape of the sphere. That will help give it a nice round texture. You don't really want to shade your sphere sideways. That will flatten it out. It will look way less 3D if you shade just straight up the side. You can shade straight if you still follow the curve. If you still follow the curve of the object that you're shading. But if you just, unless you're hatch marking,
which is a whole nother beast, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to leave that alone.
Yeah.
Do you use Notan or 3-value thumbnails? What is Notan?
Wordwin, I have no idea what Notan is, and I usually don't use a value scale because I use color most of the time. 99% of the time, I am a color person. I rarely work in black and white. I used to. I did a lot of studies in black and white to get a feel for the values, and then I associated the colors with the values so I could make the transition to using just color.
For example?
Yes.
For example, like yellow to red or something in that nature. right?
Yeah, I can sort of touch on the color yellow, like bright old sunshiny yellow would be on this side. Red is actually depending on what red you use. Tends to be darker than yellow, and blue tends to be the darkest color of everything. That's why it it's usually associated over here in the shadow area. And when you shade things with blue shadows, it tends to look more lifelike and realistic because out in the natural world, shadows are usually blue if it's a nice sunny day, which is really odd to think about. But if you go and you look at photos of like summer vacations and you look really close at some shadows on like a picnic table or a person, you'll notice that they're kind of blue. May not be super obvious that it's blue, but it's there.
Because they are super dark in value. Tie up.
All right. There was one last thing I wanted to go over, and that was transparent objects.
Bum bum bum. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah. Let me really quick. I want to throw in just a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Put in that contour. I like it.
Just want to shade the bean just a little bit before I get rid of it.
Oh, that's a nice looking bean. Looks real beany.
Let's see. And I think the shape that I was going for is there's a shape here, and they are connected, and so this is rounded right here.
It looks like, yeah, that's what it looks like. Totally.
Construction drawing.
Construction. But it looks good. Looks very beany.
Okay. Let me just make a new layer. We'll turn that one off. And actually, I liked this. We'll leave that up there. However, okay. Transparent objects cast transparent shadows. That's kind of like a what? But
yeah,
if you
it
look
sounds counterintuitive. It does.
It does. It does sound counterintuitive, but if you look up like a glass ball or a glass sphere, you get a very clear idea of what that means. I had a whole bunch of glass spheres on here that I closed the window of, unfortunately, so I will be looking for them again. Hang on. If you have a marble on hand at your house, though, those are really fun to try and draw from life. Even without like sticking a really sharp light on it like a lamp, just let it sit out on your table in the natural light and try to draw it or shade it from life. Come here, sphere. Come here. Object, object, object. I'm actually pulling all of these from DeviantArt because they have a wonderful stock selection. That might do. Let me make sure I didn't actually have. Nope, that was just a still life. Ooh, but that's an interesting light. Okay, I need an actual marble here. And if anyone looks up a marble or finds a marble before I do that's resting on a surface to where you can see the shadow that it's casting, by all means, post it. And we will gladly break it down, but I think I've found one. This is by Mr. Dragon X. It is a stock image of a marble. I'm going to put this somewhere useful, and we're going to break its shadows down. Pop that back up there. So we have a transparent object, and you might notice immediately something very, very shiny behind it. That's the light passing through our object, and we can actually see where it's passing through because of some highlights. Let me grab. Oh, what color? Orangey. Orange. Can we see that? We can kind of see that. So there's light. This might actually be like across the surface, and it's not deep within the surface. But we do see light passing through. right here. You might remember the parts of a cast shadow that I mentioned, that there's a little bit of reflected light in a cast shadow, and then the core shadow. Aha, there we go. The core shadow, and then the rest is kind of light. This is a cast shadow on steroids with reflected light, except it's not reflected light. It kind of is, because its light is passing through. But you'll notice on this object as well, yoink, that it's really, can you even see a core shadow on this marble? Well, not especially. It's very, very difficult. I can see the highlights, and the rest of it kind of looks just all lit up, and there's like this big old shiny bag here because light's passing through it. We can kind of maybe see a little bit of a core shadow. And it's not like it's super dark. It's not black. Oh, no, 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 not at all. But there also seems to be a little bit of a shadow right here. And oh, there's a little bit of shadow right up here. Put this on overlay so we can kind of see it. I'll highlight these. There's a little shadow right here. And then there actually isn't really a shadow here. That's just my brain going, there should be a shadow because, hey, it's a sphere and our light's coming from this way. The shadow is actually kind of like on the back side of this marble. It feels like it is. It's not super contrasty. There's not a lot of contrast. It kind of feels like it's back here. And then, of course, there's a color of the carpet that we can see through the marble, which makes it look lighter. And then the shadow itself. There's that occlusion line right here. And the really strong shadow. And then ooh, the light that passed through it. And you'll see there's a little bit of blue right here from the marble in the shadow. And there's actually a hard, darker shadow back here around the edges that fills in here because there's like a little sunburst from all the light passing through the marble. And that's why drawing from life is awesome. It'll be easier to see these things. It'd be nice if it was just a plain old white marble. Maybe a little bit easier to see. Wordwin, bunch of different ones. Quartzy things. Aha, very nice. I like this one. This is from minerals.com from Wordwin. You can also examine this with a very different light source. Very, very different light source. Right above, we see the shiny spot. And this one, we can actually get some core shadows on. It's not really core shadows. I don't know what to call them. They probably are called core shadows regardless, but this is the shadow underneath is actually causing the shadow on the marble itself in these places. And then you have some back here. And then you have reflected light back here. Oh, let me darken that. Reflected light here. You still have some shiny spots where there's, of course, lines and texture. And here the light is passing through, giving us this brightly colored piece down here. And then the shadows down below it. So doing a transparent object. Actually, if you want your light source above, light's going to pass through and it's going to cover the back side and get shown underneath of it. And then the shadow is going to get cast around it. So this is light, this is light. This technically is all dark if you want to really simplify it. And that's the other thing, is you can simplify shading almost like you can simplify drawing. If you find out that drawing a marble a certain way still reads as a marble and you like it, you use it. It doesn't have to be 100% totally accurate all the time.
Easy Drawing on YouTube says, if the form we will have to deal with its light, we will see different shades. Is that if the form?
Clarify?
I'm wondering. I wonder if the form we have to deal with is a light form. We'll have to see different shades. And then Ian is actually going to send you in the drawing of the sphere and coloring of the sphere that he's doing to your Watch Me Work.
Awesome. I'll keep that open. And actually, we're out of time.
Oh.
That is our 2 hours.
Oh, wow. It just flew right on by.
It did. I was actually afraid I wouldn't have enough to talk about for an hour.
Oh my, you covered so much, Jazz. Like, so much information packed into there.
All right. Well, since that is it, we still have about 2 more beta classes to try out on the next 2 Saturdays. If you're interested in attending, you can find us on watchmework.com. I will also stream on Twitch at Jasmo Colors. If you want to follow along, that's great. If you want to send in your pieces, your work to get critiqued and see if you're going in the right direction, or if you're just having trouble with something and you need a little extra hand, you can send that in to this email, Jasmine at watchmework.com, or even to Bronwyn at watchmework.com. And
we appreciate you for coming, guys.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming. We really do appreciate it. We appreciate any feedback you have for our class as well. If we missed something, if you want us to talk about something else that's still on the beginner side or even on the more advanced side, let us know. And we will catch you guys all next time.